So barges, they move in effectively these tows where you'll have 40 barges strapped to one tugboat. And what that lets you do is effectively move 10 acres worth of cargo with one 4-man crew on the boat. And then you don't have to have all that cargo for one person. You can stop and drop one barge at a specific terminal and keep moving up and down the river. And the barge effectively acts as floating storage. It's unmanned as well. So it's a similar relationship between a truck and a trailer if there was many more trailers attached to that one truck.
Today, we're talking about one of the most underrated parts of the U.S. freight system, the inland waterways. You know, that 12,000-mile network of rivers and canals that quietly moves hundreds of millions of tons of cargo every year? Yeah, that one. Joining me is Jason Aristides. He is the CEO of OpenTug, a company that's bringing modern tech, think booking platforms, AI, and GPS tracking to the tug and barge world. Jason's on a mission to make marine freight more accessible, efficient, and a whole lot smarter. So we're going to be diving into how this part of the supply chain works and some of those interesting factoids that surrounds the U.S. inland waterways system. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. You certainly know your barges and you know how to introduce them as well. So yeah, honored to be on here and really looking forward to diving in deep, but not too deep, only to the depth of the Mississippi River. We're not going blue water today.
Nice. Awesome little segue there, because before I hit record, we were talking about a previous episode that friend of the show, Gray Sharkey, and I have done an episode on sort of the underrated modes of shipping. And it was a tugs and barges focus feature. And that was how we got introduced. Gray Sharkey was kind enough, to point you guys out, and we were able to, sort of showcase the software live on the show. So it was really interesting. She sent that episode over to you guys over at OpenTug, and now we are making this conversation happen. So before we get into sort of the software and visibility and inland waterways issues, give us a little or maybe a background of how you got into this industry, because you were explaining how to pronounce your last name before we hit record. And so I'd love for you to share that with the audience.
Yeah, certainly. Well, my road to my river to getting into the barging world is relatively long. And I, started growing up in Seattle. And around that time, I was really focused on trying to build something really great around helping improve the way America does business. So my best friends and myself, who are now my two co-founders, we started working on trying to predict things that were hard to predict. One of those being stocks. We originally started building trading algorithms to try predict the stock market, although there was some bigger players in the game, and we realized it was somewhat of a futile effort. So I started to shift my focus, and my freshman year of college, I got an opportunity to work at a great company, Foss Maritime, which is a leading tug and barge company on the West Coast. And we'd be moving barges to and from Alaska, and they would always come back one way empty. And across the board, this is a massive problem. Huge numbers of assets, they go on a one-way move and they always come back empty because there's very little information systems and very little technology connecting parties to the availability of these assets. And the CEO of the company said to me, you should build a platform that connects cargo to the empty space in the barges. It's an OpenTug. And ultimately that put together the idea for creating OpenTug. And I went to my co-founders. We couldn't predict stocks, so we thought, hey, we see this huge opportunity where barges are moving some of the most important commodities across the US, almost in a forgotten mode of transportation. People aren't thinking about, hey, how can we make this better? Because we can move cargo 85% more green compared to trucking and rail, and significantly cheaper, but people lack the understanding of how to do it efficiently, where they can find barges, how much do barges cost, and we wanted to bring that all into a software platform. So I worked on that through college. We started building the building blocks behind it. And once I graduated, I realized that I had just fallen in love with the barge industry, and I was ready to do whatever it takes to build the best platform help America leverage barges.
And so for barges in particular, what type of commodities are mostly shipped using barges?
So yeah, that's a great question. Barges move all types of commodities, but specifically, it moves 70% of America's grain is all moved on barges. A huge amount of oil, liquid products, all the chemicals that make gasoline, like Nashville, Tennessee, 40% of their gasoline is shipped by barge. So all of the heavy products that you can't count, are primarily moved on barges. But you also have barges moving like military equipment, generators, heavy over the road, like oversized cargo, because when shipping a load that's too heavy for standard road weight, you don't need a permit to go by barge, but you need a permit for every state you cross via truck. So anytime people can get stuff on the water, they want to do it. I would say the largest thing that barges are primarily not shipping on the inland waterways are containers, although we hope to help change that one day.
Oh, that's super interesting. I would just have imagined that, most of our freight system, especially in the US, is built, whether it's a cargo ship, intermodal, or by truck, they're all outfitted for, a container, but not necessarily for barges, is what you're saying.
So there has been some grassroots movements to start shipping barges full of containers. New Orleans has invested like 80 billion, I believe, to build this new container facility at the mouth of the Mississippi River, which will effectively give the river system access to a huge volume of containers that need to go direct all the way from St. Paul, Minnesota to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to like Missouri. And that potentially could kickstart a great opportunity to move more containers on barges, because it goes straight through the heartland and actually aligns really well with the cargo flows. We export commodities for the most part, and those travel south on barges loaded, and then those same barges go north empty, but we import tons of finished goods, and those could be moving on those empty barges at effectively half the cost of taking the barge one way.
And so for maybe folks who are unaware of, shipping through the inland waterways, it's mostly the Mississippi River and its canals that are all connected through sort of the middle of the United States. And so for a lot of these commodity flows of what you're talking about, the cargo ship comes into maybe the port of New Orleans and they offload there, and then the freight moves on a barge from there. Is that what you're, I guess, the hypothesis, or that's what is actually happening?
Yeah. So today, I mean, barges are receiving bulk vessels, like whether that's bulk dried cargo or liquid, that comes into, say, the port of Houston, and then it might need to go somewhere inland, such as St. Paul or Nashville. The barge would go receive cargo directly from the ship. It's effectively a middle mile and bring it all the way inland, or vice versa. If your farmer's loading grain in the breadbasket of America and that needs to go over to Europe, it comes down, transloaded into a ship, and then so forth. So effectively, when it comes to containers, the idea would be, as those same ships are unloading in New Orleans onto trucks, like 80 trucks, effectively one barge would be able to carry that equivalent of containers, and you can fit up to 40 barges together, and which would be, the equivalent of 3,000 to 4,000 truckloads.
Oh, wow. So I'm curious if I'm not sure if you know the answer to this, but as you were talking, I'm thinking that for a lot of maybe the inland waterways, the water is much smoother. It's much more calmer than, say, the open ocean. So
Yep.
are barges able to travel in the open ocean pretty easily, or are those maybe like a different constructed type barge? Or
Yeah,
maybe we haven't. Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, you would be using an ocean going vessel. Some of them are ocean going barges. You get them certified to go on the ocean. And we actually work with several companies that are doing barge transportation to Alaska, Puerto Rico. Those are all on ocean going barges. And today those move containers already in those regions. The inland side, those all stay on the inland. You would have to get it certified if you wanted to go between inland and ocean. So most of the inland river barges, they're all staying on the inland rivers.
That makes sense because my first thought was, well, why don't we just build smaller cargo ships instead of a barge? But I think a barge would give much more flexibility in the type of freight that you can haul instead of just being reliant on just containers. Is that an accurate assumption?
Yeah, that's an accurate assumption, along with a couple other benefits of the barge. So barges, they move in effectively these tows where you'll have 40 barges strapped to one tugboat. And what that lets you do is effectively move 10 acres worth of cargo with one 4-man crew on the boat. And then you don't have to have all that cargo for one person. You can stop and drop one barge at a specific terminal and keep moving up and down the river. And the barge effectively acts as floating storage. It's unmanned as well. So it's a similar relationship between a truck and a trailer if there was many more trailers attached to that one truck. So if you were looking at it from a trucking standpoint, you have one trailer or one truck cab pulling 40 trailers, and then it just stops, drops them off as it goes, and continues on its route.
And so how does OpenTug play a role in this?
Definitely. So one of the great things about barges is they're very cheap and cost effective, but they're rarely just in time. And the reason is because there's lots of unpredictable factors that occur on rivers. So we have, and if you want, I can share a screen and visualize what that looks like. Let me see if I can share a screen.
Hopefully you should have the option at the bottom. There we go.
Are you able to see my screen?
Let's see. There we go. Perfect.
So this is a look at the river system, and barges, while they're very cost effective, there's a lot of unpredictable things that occur. So we have these things called locks and dams. And you can see that many times there'll be delays that occur at the locks and dams that can potentially last. This one is like 20 hours. So that's a pretty large delay. In addition to that, you'll see here there's some flooding going on in the river system, actually quite a few floods right now. Here you can see an overview of the core inland waterways, the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, Arkansas, intercoastal waterways. And all of these are affected by things such as visibility, water levels, lock delays. So OpenTug's goal is to help bring just-in-time supply chains to barge transportation by predicting all of the conditions that will affect the barge's voyage and help ensure that that's known before the shipment occurs to enable large companies to set up just-in-time supply chains by barge.
And so for folks who are just listening and not able to see the screen right now, what we're looking at is a map of the United States, but mainly focused on the inland waterways. So you think of Louisiana, the Port of New Orleans, where these commodities are offloaded and then added to a barge. And then what you're showing us now is different filters on top of those inland waterway routes, which are showing the different dams that you're talking about, potential flooding that could impact your shipping, and then also like weather patterns. Is that what you were also the filters on the map of what you were showing?
Yeah. So when wind gets too high, like as in all forms of transportation, a barge may stop and wait, and that obviously adds time and money. So one of the parts we do is we provide instant quoting. So we predict the cost of the trade or the shipment by barge, and we're using all these factors. So if you think you're shipping today for 10 grand, but you don't realize that, say, there's 2 days of wind, that could add, let's say, another 20%. So we're using all these data points to predict, if you want to move a barge, like move it on this day because you won't be subjected to these wind delays. Or if you do have to, at least you know how much it's probably going to cost with that in account. So as you can tell, people who are using barges, they're unlocking major value for their company because they're able to ship it at almost 70% less price than using another mode. But it requires like a high level of knowledge to know how to use barges.
And what are some of those, maybe those little points of a high level of knowledge? Is that, some of the data points that we were seeing on the screen, or
Yeah,
maybe it's
certain like data points regarding that. Like how much cargo are you able to load in the barge when the water level goes down? It's like what if water levels are low, you can't put as much cargo in the barge, or if you are shipping on a specific area and you don't pay attention to what lock closures are going to be or lock delays, which is like the dams I was showing you, then you could be subject to paying a lot more money than you anticipated if you were unaware of like how the locks and the water levels occur, or if you're unaware that when visibility gets below a certain level, the barge won't move. So all these different pieces of knowledge go into figuring out how you can ship affordably by barge. And because a lot of it is just scattered across many different websites, not even on websites altogether, it makes it daunting for a supply chain manager to say, hey, I want to start looking at using barge for our company. Like they need to come from the barge industry to a degree, or have a mentor that can teach them about it. And our goal is to like democratize barge by putting everything into one place where any supply chain or logistics manager can pick up and instantly know like, hey, what does it look like to start leveraging barge in my supply chain, and have a lot of the answers.
And so essentially, if you're not in a rush to ship, or maybe you have a couple weeks timeline where you don't have to worry about maybe different weather patterns, you can prioritize a more cost-effective route using a barge versus other traditional, sort of transportation models like over the road or intermodal. Is that just sort of the goal of OpenTug?
Yeah, that's definitely the goal of OpenTug. And even if you do have time sensitivity around products, the goal is to enable you to plan effectively. So like it can show up on time, but you just like it's the transit will take longer, if that makes sense.
It does. And so
Like you'll
I
have a
guess
longer transit time, but if you're planning on it to show up at like ahead of time at that end of the transit, it can still be just in time. And we want to bring the predictability, but it does take a longer lead time from when you get it out the door.
what was crazy about what you were going through the demo is that you were talking about how one tug can have several barges, hooked up to it. Essentially, are most barges the same size?
Yeah, so barges are in a pretty much a common size. There's several types. So you could have basically a hopper barge, which is generally moving grain. They're 195 feet long by roughly 35 feet wide. It carries about 1,500 tons of cargo, and most of them will be between 200 feet and 195 feet on the inland side. Then for tank barges, which is for liquid, you have like three standard sizes: 10,000 barrel, 30,000 barrel, and sometimes 25. On the ocean, they're all different types of sizes, and they don't move as frequently in what they call a tow, which is a group of barges and a boat.
And so, would you, with OpenTug in particular, are you? I noticed in one of the videos prepping for this conversation that you guys have GPS trackers that you're putting on the barges. Is that accurate?
Yep. So here's an example of one of our GPS devices. They're satellite transmitted. So one of the things about barges, like a trailer or a container, is that like they're untracked, but they move across different boats. So you'll have one boat moving a barge, and then it'll switch off to another boat. So if you're a shipper of this barge, or even the barge owner, you can lose visibility of it. Like you can't just track the boat to know where your barge is, because it could have gotten dropped off. And the whole industry prior to OpenTug traditionally was trying to track their barge based on the boat somebody tells them it's on. So one of the things we wanted to do was bring people that real-time visibility of where their barges are. So we're deploying tracking devices. It's really easy to put it on like with a magnet. And we actually work with a network of contractors and surveyors who can place them for us, for our customers at any of their facilities. So across the inland system, we already have people with our inventory who can go put it on your barge.
Oh, that's super interesting. And so you're able to provide that real-time visibility, which is, I think, lots of companies talk about visibility. It's mostly on the cargo ship side of things. But for trucking, there's unless you have, sophisticated tracking, ELD, things like that, which some carriers do, but majority of trucks don't have any kind of, visibility unless the driver is being tracked. And
Yeah.
so for this, it sounds like it's much more efficient. Why do you think that more companies or maybe more brokers or more shippers don't use barge traffic or barge shipments or
Well,
methods of shipments?
I mean, it sounds silly, but I believe it's a huge lack of understanding of what the rivers have to offer.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. So I was at a trade show in Houston at a shipping conference, and I was talking to a major ocean line, and I asked them, like, do you guys ship containers on barges ever? And the response to me was, you can't send a barge to Chicago, so no. And I know that to be false. We're moving barges to Chicago all the time from Houston, and we were in Houston at the time. So there's a large misunderstanding of like where these rivers can serve, what the density of is. There's like 40,000 barges moving at any given time on the river system. And like I mentioned before, most people, they go through like supply chain school and they learn about truck, rail, ocean, but nobody's talking, like people just don't really talk about barges a great deal. They just, as you mentioned, are quietly moving millions of tons of cargo, but they're just out of sight, out of mind. And yeah, historically, I feel like has been just overlooked. Although, I will say, with regard to containers, there, I think one of the main reasons that we're not using tons of barges, container barges, is like there's not as many terminals on the inland side set up to handle containers. So unlike Europe, in Europe they use barges and they barge containers all across Europe, and they have basically more container ready terminals to load and unload those along the rivers. But in America, it hasn't come yet. Like I mentioned, I believe the Port of New Orleans' new container investment might spur that, though.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're the only port that is really investing in this.
Well, there's quite a few more ports, but Port of New Orleans is effectively like the gateway to every part of the river. So all you really need is New Orleans to like bring the container volume, and I think the rest will follow.
Now, what is, I guess, sort of the furthest, I guess, maybe east or west that you can go by barge, or does it really depend on the water flows?
So I am actually starting a a I'm starting an initiative that I know will take me years to accomplish, but I'm looking to bridge effectively the Snake River with the Missouri River to enable you to cross the country via water to go from Pittsburgh to the Pacific Ocean via the river. It would require a 200-mile canal between the Snake River and the Missouri River, but China made a 1,200-mile canal, so I feel like we might be able to do it if we put our mind to it. But as of right now, you can go as far east as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, as far north as St. Paul, Minnesota, and as far west. It depends on which rivers you're looking at, but for the most part, you can make it all the way to past Omaha, Nebraska, Sioux City, Iowa would be the furthest west you can go on the Missouri River right now.
And then that's I would imagine for the rest of those terminals, or that would be ideal spots for those terminals to start to pop up where you can start transloading some of those shipments from the barge over to probably truckload, intermodal freight, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean there are lots of terminals, but they just don't all have container cranes. Like most of them don't have container cranes. There's like tons of terminals, so they just need a crane. But if the volume's there, like they'll go buy a crane. So I think that's kind of what I'm anticipating as New Orleans starts to bring in more containers. Those like that will open the doors for the ocean lines to start having those conversations. Hey, how can you get my product like all the way inland in bulk without having to take it off the water? And they're more than likely And I've spoken to many of the terminals myself, and I know they want to do it. So it just depends. It depends, like, can they find the right shipper for it?
Do you consider OpenTug more of a visibility platform or like a TMS platform, maybe like a, I don't know, BMS, like barge management system? Like, what is that? What is, I guess, the tech stack look like, and who is the ideal user? Is it a shipper? Is it a broker? A carrier?
Yeah, so I would consider us an optimization and visibility platform and automation platform. Effectively, we work with both the shippers, the barge lines, and we work with third parties involved in the transaction, because on every barge shipment, there's many parties who are involved. You have
Hmm.
two terminals on either end. You have a barge line, a tugboat company, a shipper, and like an inspector or surveyor. All of those people, they need to know when the barge will arrive in order for them to do the job right. And everybody's subject to the weakest link. So if the terminal doesn't know that you're showing up, even if the inspector was efficient, the shipper was efficient, and the carrier was efficient, like, you're still stuck because the terminal didn't know you were coming. And that happens a ton in the barge industry because they're not tracked and people aren't sharing information. So we lose barge days all the time. Like, there's lost barge days because nobody told the terminal that it was coming, and the barge shows up and the terminal's like there. So part of what we're doing on the visibility side is helping align all the stakeholders and effectively enable them to amp it up by creating more barge days, giving them, everybody who needs to know the information and a prediction of when it'll arrive, to create more barge days, make more barge capacity. And
So,
then on the optimization side, we're effectively pulling in all the data about like water levels, locks, traffic, helping recommend to shippers and operators, like, if you don't ship until tomorrow, you'll save, X $1,000 because you won't be waiting for wind. So that is effectively more on the optimization side.
oh, that's super interesting because where does, I guess, it almost sounds like a routing guide where you would need to, be included in a shipper's routing guide or in a broker's routing guide. So then that way they are making sure that, depending on the freight, that they could save a bunch of money if they just move it in a different way versus what they're typically, using trucks for.
Yeah, and we definitely have like route planning, and we also have built an AI that reads through all of the emails from that people are sending to each other and keeps the platform always up to sync with all the emails that are happening. So they may be scheduling an order via email and a carrier is sending them update via email. The AI effectively like reads it, extracts all the events to help with like auto payment, with like demurrage claims, with general tracking. And then we
What
try to recommend them a way to save in that process.
So when it comes to maybe some case studies or like shipping stories, are there any interesting case studies that OpenTug has participated in? Maybe one of your customers has it that you can share with us.
Most of the stuff we do is like pretty much covered under non-disclosures for the most part, but we are working with some of the largest oil and gas companies in the world and some of the largest barge lines in the system, and helping them optimize their barge supply chains.
So what
I can't
does
get too much more specific around like those companies.
Sure. So give me, I guess, maybe some examples of some more interesting freight that you've seen hauled on a barge, maybe during your previous days or current days.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, people are moving all types of stuff on barges. Like, we've helped folks move entire trains on a barge down the river system, where they're transloading like a train car onto a barge and taking it all the way down the rivers.
That's I mean,
You can really imagine in Europe, they like the guys driving the barges there will have their entire families living on the barge. And I saw a child's play set on top of an oil barge, which I don't think that would pass the mustard for regulation in America, but it's cool that they do it out there.
Well, that brings up an interesting thought. does an open tug exist in, say, Europe or South America, or is this really like this visibility approach into tugs and barges? Does that really only exist within your company?
I mean, I would say we are a very unique company focusing on bringing predictability to river transportation, and they don't exist in Europe and South America yet, but they're about to soon.
Yes. Well, that's it's interesting you say that because Grace and I have done a show on South American logistics, and they have the Amazon River, right? And so
Yeah.
for a lot of shipments, they are hauled into, I think Peru had just opened up one of the biggest mega ports in South America, and so they're transloading all of that freight off of the port in Peru, and then they ship it over to the Amazon River, and then they're barges down in there. They're using different trucks and all different kinds of methods of shipments.
It's really quite incredible. They have a vast river system, and one that we definitely want to help amp up. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the South American markets. They're starting to become more and more prevalent in like the grain commodity world. And I think in order for them to fully maximize like their output for exports, they need to like maximize their usage of barges. And I think barges is one of the reasons that America is the top exporter of those type of commodities, because we have such great access to move huge amounts of cargo directly from their source out to port on barges.
So what does expansion look like for OpenTug? What's in the future, maybe planned that you could share with us?
Certainly. So when it comes to American barge operations, like our goal is to effectively remove any empty miles and unused barge days by optimizing, like I mentioned, the entire system of all the parties that are involved on the barge transaction. And we want, as part of that, we want to deploy trackers across every barge in America and bring visibility to the barge market. As we expand there, we're already in the process of getting into Europe. South America will be next. And once we have brought this level to our existing stakeholders, we're going to be effectively automating the barge logistics as a whole. So recommending, once an order comes in, which barges are doing this job for the most efficient price, and helping orchestrate which barges provide what service.
That's awesome. I mean, logistics has obviously been around since the dawn of humanity, and so the fact that we have this incredible system to use and transport goods all throughout the world, and no one has put any kind of visibility solution in place until your company. I think it's really fascinating, what you guys are doing, and hopefully, you can get into those different markets and be able to share some of that insight and some of that data, with us all, because it's truly fascinating how we can the creativity, I think, behind all of these different shipment options. So anything that you feel, Jason, that's important to mention that we haven't already talked about?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of great stuff. I mean, some of the things that are also on our roadmap is helping bring like autonomous barges into the market. So, barges, I think moving them on a boat is great long term. When you're doing a long haul, like you can put 40 barges on a boat and move them all together. But once you actually get within the ports, you need like these other shift boats to move the barges around. And I think bringing autonomous barges that can shift themselves will really speed up the entire system, because you don't have to be waiting around for boats to come and be ready to move you to the terminal. So an area I'm really excited about. If you know any Series B investors who want to help us fund that, have them call me. I'm joking, but not so much. And then, yeah, I think that is like one of my final thoughts, but one I'm really excited about.
For sure. And then I would imagine, the unsung heroes, the tugboats and all of this. How does we didn't even get to touch on that, but I would love to hear, sort of a, brief overview of how do tugs play a role in this? Or is same tracking software utilized for those as well?
Yeah, everything that we're doing for barges is applicable for the tugs, minus the tracking devices, because the tugs themselves already have AIS data, but we're providing the same technology. They always basically move together until the autonomous barges come into play. But as of now, anytime a barge is moving, it's hopefully because a tug is pushing it and it's not floating down the river. But so I would say it's pretty much the same for the tugs as well.
For tugs as well. That's good to know. So I guess, one last question. Where can folks follow you, follow more of your work, get in touch with OpenTug for some transportation solutions for their own company?
Yeah, thanks. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm relatively frequent on LinkedIn. Also, we can be reached anytime via our website at opentug.com, or people can call me directly too. And I'm happy to talk with them.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, perfect. This was a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be sure to put all of those links in the show notes so folks can reach out. So appreciate what you're doing and sharing your insight here.
I really had a great time. Thank you for taking the time and helping us share the wealth of barges with the world.
Heck yeah, more people need to know about the unsung heroes of freight. So
100%. Doing the Lord's work there.
there we go.